Your kid threatened community order today.
Hell yeah!
Kids!
And you crossed every line in this neighborhood.
You step 1 inch closer and I'll cite him for trespassing. That was the first thing Regina Harlan hissed at me, her arm fully extended, the barrel of her silver handgun aimed straight at my 8-year-old's chest. The board chair didn't blink, didn't tremble, didn't even seem to breathe. She stood there in her crimson blazer like a warning sign nobody asked for, acting as if pointing a loaded weapon at a child was some kind of routine enforcement. Aiden froze beside the mailbox, his backpack sliding off his shoulder. The officer of rules snapped her glare toward me, as if daring me to move. I could smell the tang of fresh-cut grass mixing with the metallic scent of the weapon she held. And before she could open her mouth again, I stepped forward and let the truth drop between us like a steel door. "That firearm is already out of compliance," I said, "and the state database you forgot about still shows my certification." Her expression twitched, just briefly, but enough. The enforcer in crimson wasn't expecting that. She expected me to fold, to panic, to beg. Not to remind her that, before I ever lived in Silver Willow Crossing, I'd spent 12 years as a ballistic safety engineer, signing off on weapons she didn't even know how to field strip. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, stay with me, and hit subscribe now. I lifted my eyes to Aiden, who hadn't moved an inch. His fingers curled tight around the little red wooden plane he carried everywhere. The toy his mother carved for him on the last night she was ever truly healthy. The one he refused to leave at home, even on school days. That small object was his anchor, and seeing it shake in his hand as Regina Harlan threatened him lit something in my chest that felt dangerously close to breaking. "I made a promise the day he was born," I said quietly. "No one else gets to hurt him. Not ever again." The clipboard queen didn't care. She lifted the gun a fraction higher, claiming he'd violated a brand new distance from mailbox regulation the HOA had invented, apparently overnight. A rule meant for adults, not children, not for little boys who still double knot their shoes because their mother used to show them how. I could hear Aiden's trembling breath, quick and shallow. The tyrant in heels clicked a step forward, making the absurd claim that she had full authority to detain residents who violated critical neighborhood safety code. A sentence so ridiculous it might have been laughable if it wasn't being said while threatening an 8-year-old with a loaded handgun. My heart hammered hard enough that I felt it in my fingertips. But panic wasn't an option. Not for me. Not after everything we'd survived before moving here. I kept my voice level, even as heat crawled up my spine. "Lower the weapon. This is a felony in progress," I warned. She didn't lower it. Instead, the clipboard. Queen narrowed her eyes and spat something about uncooperative homeowners. She tried to claim she was just documenting a violation. I noticed the slight shift in her stance, the weight on her back foot, the rigid line in her jaw. She wasn't just unstable, she was escalating, and fast. The officer of rules wasn't alone either. Behind her, near the HOA office walkway, stood Mason Keller, the community security contractor. His hands hung awkwardly at his sides. He kept glancing at the gun, at Aiden, at me. His face twitched with something, fear, doubt, guilt, something he wasn't ready to name yet. But I saw it, a crack. "Look at him," I said, pointing to my son. "He's a child. This is wrong, and you know it." Regina Harlan didn't flinch. "Children cause the most violations," she said coldly. "If he's old enough to break rules, he's old enough to face consequences." My pulse spiked, my vision tunneled, and in that carved-out moment of terror and fury, I knew this wasn't ending here. Not with words, not with reason, and definitely not with her finger still hovering over that trigger. "And tell me, where are you watching from?" Aiden's breath hitched in a soft, broken sound that sliced straight through me, and that was when Regina Harlan made her next mistake. She stepped closer. The board chair angled the gun as if she were adjusting a clipboard rather than threatening a child. I could see the sun glint off the barrel, the trembling outline of my son reflected in the polished metal. She didn't hesitate. She didn't blink. She acted like she owned the oxygen in our cul-de-sac. "Back away, Ethan," she barked. "Your son is in violation. This is protocol." "Protocol!" The enforcer in crimson said it like the word absolved her of sanity. Aiden shrank back until his shoes brushed the curb, clutching that red wooden plane so tight his knuckles paled. Every instinct in me screamed to yank him behind me, but I couldn't risk triggering the tyrant in heels. She was unpredictable, wired too tight, rattled by the authority she thought she had. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't alone. Not really. My phone vibrated once inside my pocket, the same coded alert my brother and I had used since the night everything changed. Caleb didn't need explanations. He always listened for the tone, always moved before the world caught up. And if Regina Harlan kept that gun raised another minute, he'd be here far sooner than she expected. "You're escalating a situation you don't understand," I warned her. The officer of rules sneered like I was the one causing a scene. Residents peeked through blinds. One neighbor cracked open her screen door, but stayed frozen. They didn't know the full story yet. They didn't understand how many times the clipboard queen had invented new violations just to corner us. The grass crunched behind me. Mason Keller stepped forward, but only half a step, as if his conscience tethered him, but his job held him back. His eyes darted from me to the weapon to Aiden. He swallowed hard, his jaw flexed, his hands twitched at his sides. He wanted to intervene. He wasn't ready to. "Ma'am," he muttered, voice thin. "He's just a kid." Regina shot him a glare sharp enough to cut through bone. "Do your job, Mason!" He recoiled like her words slapped him. The clipboard queen lifted her chin, angling the weapon again, this time closer to Aiden's face. A bead of sweat slipped down my spine as I cataloged the trajectory, her unstable grip, the pressure on her index finger. Years of ballistics work had burned an unshakable instinct into me. This situation was seconds from disaster. Aiden whispered, "Dad?" His voice cracked on the single syllable. That was enough. I stepped forward, slow and intentional, keeping my voice level. "You point that gun 1 inch higher," I said, "and the state will classify this as attempted harm against a minor. You'll lose everything: title, authority, your board, your freedom." The enforcer in crimson laughed, actually laughed. "You think you get to define consequences? I decide what happens here." She didn't notice the faint shift in light that flickered across her forehead, but I did, a sharp, perfect pin of red. A dot so precise only one person could have put it there: Caleb. He was still unseen, still silent, still operating with the same discipline that had carried him across continents. But the message was unmistakable. "Drop the gun, Regina. Now." The tyrant in heels blinked, confused by the sudden glow on her skin. She swiped at her forehead, missed, frowned. She didn't understand what it was yet, but I did. My pulse steadied, my breathing evened. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt the shift. "You need to lower your weapon," I told her calmly. She didn't recognize the danger, not yet. "Ethan, this is your last warning." "No," I said softly. "This is yours." She stiffened, but before she could respond, a voice echoed from across the street, firm, trembling, terrified. "Regina, stop!" Linda Marston, 62, widow, quiet, observant. She stood on her porch gripping her railing with both hands, her eyes wide with horror. She wasn't brave enough to run toward us, but she was brave enough to speak. And sometimes that's how community unraveling begins, with one voice refusing to stay silent. Regina Harlan turned toward her, weapon still raised, which meant, for one dangerous second, Aiden was left directly in the unguarded line of sight, and everything inside me snapped like a wire pulled too tight. I lunged the moment Regina Harlan shifted her aim, my body moving faster than my thoughts, faster than fear. Aiden stumbled backward, his little red plane slipping from his grip and skittering across the pavement. The board chair snapped her head toward me, the gun jerking dangerously as she tried to reassert control. For a heartbeat, all I saw was the barrel pointed somewhere between my son and the woman who dared to shout at her. But my attention wasn't only on Regina. It was on Mason Keller, because something inside him finally cracked open. The clipboard queen barked at him again. "Stand down, Mason!" Her voice tore through the humid morning air, sharp enough to punch holes in it. He didn't move, didn't speak, but his internal war was written on every inch of him. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching from where I stood. His eyes flicked to Aiden, then to me, then to the tyrant in heels holding the weapon. His shoulders tightened, rising with shallow breaths he couldn't hide. Even his hands betrayed him, Opening, closing, opening, like he was trying to release something he'd been gripping for months. Fear, guilt, obedience. The officer of rules didn't see it. People like her never did. They got drunk on their own authority and went blind to the collapse around them. "Do not interfere," she snapped, stepping sideways without noticing that the red dot on her forehead followed the movement flawlessly. Mason swallowed, throat bobbing like he was trying to choke down a truth that refused to stay buried. He took another hesitant step forward, his foot dragged slightly, hesitant, torn. Sweat gathered at his temple. He wiped it, but his hand shook so much it only made it worse. "Ma'am," he tried again, voice cracking. This isn't protocol." Regina Harlan spun back toward him. "I make the protocol. I keep this neighborhood safe. If you can't follow orders, you're replaceable." Another flinch rippled through him, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was shame. The enforcer in crimson tightened her grip on the gun, completely unaware of the sniper dot marking her. Aiden whimpered, pressing himself against my leg as I positioned myself between him and the danger. The air felt charged, stretched thin, vibrating with tension. Mason's breathing hitched. His eyes darted toward the HOA office door, like he wanted to run inside, like he wanted to escape the mess he'd been part of. But he didn't. He stayed. His fingers twitched toward the radio, clipped to his belt, then away. He wet his lips, stepped again, and this time his entire posture shifted. His weight leaned forward, his stance widened, his expression tightened with something close to resolve. He wasn't on Regina's side anymore, not fully. "Mason," I said quietly, "look at her. Look at what she's doing." He did, and the pain that flickered across his face told me everything. He had seen this pattern before. Maybe not with a gun, maybe not with a child, but he'd watched Regina Harlan abuse authority long before today. He'd watched her yell, threaten, humiliate, and every time he'd chosen silence had been another brick in the wall trapping him. The tyrant in heels barked, "Step back," or "I'll have your contract terminated." His shoulders jerked, but he didn't step back. Instead, he whispered, barely audible, "I can't keep doing this." Regina blinked. "What did you say?" Mason didn't answer, but his eyes said everything. They were glossy, filled with conflict and a dawning sense of responsibility. He shifted again, just slightly, but with purpose. His hand inched toward his radio, not to call for help, to document, to witness. "Mason!" she snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. "If you don't obey, you'll be held accountable for his violations too." His gaze darkened. "He's a child," he said softly, but with more courage than I'd ever heard in his voice. The clipboard queen recoiled, stunned. Someone beneath her dared push back. Her finger twitched on the trigger in rage, not control, and that twitch, tiny as it was, made the sniper dot on her forehead burn brighter. Caleb was watching, tracking, waiting. I angled slightly, shielding Aiden even more, feeling his small hands fisting into my shirt. His breath trembled against my spine. My own heartbeat thundered through me like a countdown. Mason's internal war reached its peak. He stepped fully beside me now, not far, not heroic, but close enough to show the first cracks of defiance. And Regina Harlan saw it. "You!" she snarled, voice going guttural. "You're betraying the HOA." "No," Mason said, shaking his head as sweat dripped down his jaw. "You're betraying it." Her eyes widened. Then she swung the gun back toward us. And that was the moment, right there, when I realized this wouldn't end without something breaking. Something big. The moment Regina Harlan swung the gun back toward us, the world snapped into a narrower, colder focus. Aiden whimpered behind me, his fingers clawing at my shirt. And Mason froze, not out of fear this time, but because the enforcer in crimson had pushed the threat past a line he never imagined she'd cross. Even he couldn't rationalize it anymore. "Move!" the clipboard queen hissed, her eyes wild, her breath uneven. "I said move!" But she wasn't talking to me. She was talking to Mason, ordering him to abandon us entirely. The tyrant in heels stepped closer, manic authority dripping off her. "You're obstructing an active compliance intervention," she snapped. "And she jabbed the gun slightly my way. "You're accruing violations by the second." Violations. She was pointing a weapon at a child, and still talking about violations. Mason, I said quietly, not taking my eyes off Regina. Look at her. Look at what she's choosing. He did. His Adam's apple bobbed hard. His breath shuddered. His stance fell apart, then reconstructed itself, bit by trembling bit. This wasn't courage born suddenly. It was courage forced out of a man who had run out of places to hide. Regina Harlan caught the shift. Her jaw tightened. "Don't make me report you," the officer of rules growled. "You'll lose your pension, your clearance, everything." He blinked rapidly, and I could see the panic trying to reclaim him. His hand grazed his radio again, shaking so violently I wasn't sure he could even press the button. "Mason," she warned, "choose wisely." But his gaze slid, not to her, but to Aiden, still clinging to my leg with tear-bright eyes. And something inside Mason broke for good. "I'm choosing right," he whispered. That was when Regina Harlan truly snapped. "You're finished," the enforcer in crimson screamed, pointing the gun directly at him now. "You traitor, you're done." I felt Aiden's nails dig into my skin. I felt my brother's presence, a different kind of pressure, a promise of protection from somewhere unseen. And I felt Regina's unraveling take on a dangerous, reckless shape. "Regina," I said, stepping sideways to shield both Mason and Aiden, "you're escalating something you can't walk back. Lower the weapon." She turned that feral glare on me. "You don't tell me what I can or can't do on HOA property," she spat. "I enforce the covenant. I maintain order. I decide what's necessary." "You're pointing a gun at a child," I answered. "There's no policy on earth that justifies—" "Quiet!" she shrieked, and for a split second, the clipboard queen's mask cracked open wide enough for me to see the chaos underneath. Her voice dropped to a frightening monotone. "Your son ran. He ran toward restricted frontage. That's a safety hazard. That's your violation." She was rewriting reality in real time, twisting it until her logic almost sounded plausible. If you were terrified of her, if you'd been conditioned like Mason had. And then something unexpected happened. A neighbor cracked open their blinds. Another stepped onto their porch, and another paused mid-walk with their dog, eyes widening as they took in the scene. Regina Harlan, HOA board chair, weapon raised, screaming at a father and his 8-year-old. Regina spun toward them, her voice turning shrill. "Everyone back inside. This is HOA business." But they didn't move, because the red dot was still on her forehead, and now more people could see it. Mason saw their reactions. He inhaled slowly, battling every instinct to remain silent. Then, for the first time, he spoke loud enough for others to hear. "She's out of control." Regina whipped toward him again. "Shut your mouth." He didn't. His shoulders straightened, and his voice steadied, even though fear still trembled at the edges of it. "This isn't enforcement. It's personal, and it's wrong." The tyrant in heels vibrated with rage. "You think anyone will believe you?" she snarled, stepping closer. "I've documented every one of his infractions. The board backs me. The community needs me. You're nothing." "No," Mason Duzihi said, taking another step forward. "I'm a witness." Her face twisted. "You're fired." That single sentence hit him like a slap. And yet, he didn't retreat. He looked right at me, then at Aiden, then at the gun in her hands, and he took one more step toward the truth he'd been running from. That was when I felt it, a shift in the atmosphere, a subtle hum of focus. Caleb had locked onto her again. The clipboard queen didn't notice, but she was seconds away from noticing something else. The neighborhood was watching. The lies were thinning, and her unraveling had only just begun. Regina Harlan didn't lower the gun. She tightened her grip. Her knuckles went bone white as the crowd behind us grew, porch by porch, yard by yard. The enforcer in crimson realized too late that the neighborhood she'd ruled through fear was now witnessing the one thing she could never spin into compliance, her own loss of control. "Everyone step back," she barked. "This is an internal HOA disciplinary." "No," a woman across the street muttered. "That's a gun." Regina flinched at the word gun, like someone had slapped her with it. She shot the neighbor a death glare, then flicked her eyes toward me, desperate to regain dominance. "You caused this," the clipboard queen snapped. "If you just follow basic regulations, none of this—" "Regina," I cut in, keeping my voice low enough to ground Aiden, but firm enough to carve through her panic. "Pointing a weapon at a child isn't enforcement. It's a felony." The tyrant in heels recoiled, not because she disagreed, but but because she knew it was true. For a moment, she looked almost disoriented, as if her authority-heavy script had slipped from her mind, and she didn't know what line came next. Then came the pivot. The officer of rules always had a pivot. "I am authorized," she declared, voice wobbling but loud. "The board granted me emergency safety powers after your son's previous—" "There was no previous incident," Mason finally said, stepping into the open. "And you know it?" Her eyes widened with a violent betrayal. "You dare?" "Yes," he said, louder now. "I dare." It was the first time he'd ever raised his voice at her. The moment hit Regina Harlan harder than any bullet ever could. Aiden's breathing steadied when he heard Mason defend him. He clutched my shirt, whispering, "Dad." She's looking at him like she wants to hit him. She wasn't looking at Mason like she wanted to hit him. She was looking at him like she wanted to erase him. I shifted my stance to cover both of them, scanning the street out of long ingrained habit. Angles, distances, risks. Years before I ever landscaped a single yard in Brook Elm Ridge, I spent nights on forward operating bases measuring the same things: threat direction, civilian spread, cover positions. Those instincts came alive now, warning me that Regina Harlan's psyche was sliding into a territory even she didn't fully comprehend. The enforcer in crimson lifted her chin. "If you think anyone will believe you over me—" "They won't need to," I interrupted. She froze, just as I intended. "Why?" she demanded. Because the red dot on her forehead brightened for a fraction of a second before Caleb deliberately dimmed it. A warning pulse, a sniper's whisper. But that wasn't the discovery I needed for the victory strategy. Not yet. That came when my eyes drifted toward the illuminated HOA security panel mounted on the brick column behind her. A panel I had seen 100 times, but never deeply considered. And suddenly, I realized something about it. Something that made my stomach tighten. The display flickered. Regina flinched at the flicker. And Mason went pale. There it was. The piece I didn't know I was looking for until it presented itself. "Regina," I said carefully, "why is the override status blinking red?" Her expression shifted, sharp, terrified, defensive all at once. "It's nothing, just maintenance." "No," Mason croaked, barely audible. "That symbol isn't maintenance." She spun around, pointing a finger at him, forgetting, for one disastrous second, where the gun was aimed. "You answer to me," the clipboard queen hissed. "Not him, me." I moved before she could re-aim at Aiden. But I wasn't moving because of the weapon. I was moving because of what I just discovered. That blinking red icon was a federal compliance failure, a code I recognized instantly, because my former contracting job with state infrastructure trained me to identify illegal surveillance modifications on HOA properties, and Regina Harlan had one installed right here in the open. "You tapped into restricted systems," I said slowly, eyes on her, tone razor flat. "You altered an HOA panel that's connected to city oversight. That's not a violation, it's a crime." She stiffened. "You can't prove—" "Actually," Mason whispered, "he can." The tyrant in heels snapped toward him. "Not another word." But he didn't stop this time. "You forced me to sign off on those updates," he confessed, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "You said it was a cosmetic change. You lied, and I didn't realize what it meant until right now." Regina's face drained of all color. There it was. The discovery, not a document, not a clue hidden in a drawer. A live, blinking, incriminating oversight violation, exposed in front of half the neighborhood. Gasps rippled across the street. She wheeled back to me, desperation clawing at her features. "Whatever you think you know—" "I know enough," I said, "and soon everyone will." The officer of rules saw her empire cracking. Her grip on the gun trembled. Her authority began collapsing, and she took one step backward. The first retreat I had ever seen from her. Because she finally realized I wasn't just a father standing in her way. I was the one person in this neighborhood who could end her reign for good. Regina Harlan staggered back that single step, and it rippled through the entire street like a shockwave. The board chair had never retreated, not once, not even in the pettiest of disputes. And the neighbors saw it. Their murmurs grew, tense and electric, carrying through the warm air like distant thunder. Aiden tightened his grip on my arm. "Dad, is she going to run?" "No," I whispered. Running would mean admitting guilt, and Regina Harlan doesn't admit anything. The enforcer in crimson lifted her chin again, trying to reassemble the shattered pieces of her authority, but her voice betrayed her. "Everyone needs to return to their homes," she ordered, trembling on the edges. "HOA business will resume once this disturbance is settled." Her words fell flat. The clipboard queen wasn't issuing commands anymore. She was begging the world to pretend nothing had happened, and the world wasn't listening. Mason stepped forward, swallowing hard. He wasn't used to defiance, especially not toward the tyrant in heels, but something inside him had shifted for good. "You need to put the gun down," he said, quieter this time, but steadier than before. "They're all watching." She whipped toward him, eyes blazing. "They're watching you, Mason. You're the one who signed the authorization papers?" "No," he said, voice cracking. "You forced me to." That broke something in her. The officer of rules had spent years grooming him into compliance, and now he'd stepped out of her shadow in front of an entire street. Her mouth trembled. Her hand clasped the grip harder, less like enforcement and more like desperation. That was when I noticed the shift, not in her but in Aiden. My son wasn't shaking anymore. He was angry. "She aimed at me," he whispered, staring at the tyrant in heels. "She did it on purpose." My chest tightened. Aiden rarely voiced fear, let alone fury, and hearing it now lit a slow, burning fire behind my ribs. I needed this confrontation to end, not in panic, not in violence, but in truth. And we were seconds away from the tipping point. "Regina," I said, making my voice calm enough to cut through her spiraling panic. "The blinking panel proves you tampered with a restricted system. What you did today isn't just HOA misconduct. It's criminal, and you know that." Her eyes darted to the panel again. One flicker, one reminder, one bright red silent confession. "Stop talking," she hissed. "You're twisting things." "I'm identifying things," I corrected, stepping slightly between her and the crowd. "There's a difference." She raised the gun again, shaky, unfocused, but still pointed. But this time, she didn't aim at Aiden. She aimed at me. The enforcer in crimson exhaled slowly, her voice turning eerily. Soft. "You're going to walk away from this property and never come back. You hear me? I'll have the board vote to evict you permanently." "Evict me?" I echoed. "For exposing what you've been hiding?" "Yes!" she screamed. "Because you don't belong here. You never have." That line wasn't about HOA policy. It wasn't about rules. It was personal, and it cracked her mask completely. The neighbors drew closer, whispering, recording, stunned by the unraveling of a woman who once treated their street like her kingdom. Then Mason spoke again, voice hoarse. "Regina, stop. You're making it worse." "Shut up!" she yelled without looking at him. "You owe me your loyalty." He looked like she'd struck him. I took a step forward. "He doesn't owe you anything." Her grip tightened. "If you move again, I swear." "You won't fire," I said. "Because you saw the red dot." Her pupils dilated instantly. The clipboard queen's gaze darted upward to her forehead, where Caleb's laser hovered faintly, barely perceptible, but unmistakably there. She inhaled sharply, panic igniting in her chest. Not fear of death, fear of exposure, fear of losing control. "Call him off," she whispered. "Tell him to stop aiming at me." "You stop aiming at me first," I said quietly. Her hand trembled. The muzzle dipped an inch, another inch, until finally, it lowered completely. A collective breath rolled through the street, but victory wasn't mine yet. Not until I finished the step this part required. Commitment. The stakes had become personal, and I needed to lock into action. Undeniably, irreversibly. I turned to the crowd. Everyone here just saw what happened, and what she's been doing to this neighborhood is going to end. I'm filing formal reports with the city and the state oversight committee first thing in the morning. Regina's face drained. She stumbled backward, voice cracking. You wouldn't—" "Oh, I would," I said. "And they'll listen." Because I wasn't acting as a father now, or a neighbor, but as someone with professional credibility she never imagined I had. Her power was slipping, her fear was showing, and I wasn't stopping until she answered for everything. Mason didn't follow the others when the crowd slowly dispersed into clusters of shaken whispers and hurried phone calls. He stayed rooted near the curb, hands clasped so tightly they trembled, eyes locked on Regina Harland as she retreated toward her SUV like a wounded predator. The board chair kept glancing back over her shoulder, the way someone checks for shadows that suddenly feel too real. The enforcer in crimson had lost her footing, and she knew it. But I wasn't watching her anymore. I was watching him. A conflicted witness always looks the same in the moment. The truth starts leaking out. They shrink and expand at the same time. Their breath shortens. Their shoulders tense. Their eyes flick between safety and consequence. And Mason had every sign. "Dad?" Aiden whispered beside me, voice small. "Is he okay?" "Not yet," I murmured. "But he's about to be." When Regina Harlan finally slammed her car door and peeled out of the cul-de-sac, Mason sagged like her absence removed the last piece holding him upright. He rubbed his palms on his jeans. He stared at the asphalt. He breathed like someone trying to keep a dam from bursting. I approached slowly. "Mason," his head snapped up too quickly. I didn't know she would actually point it. Not at Aiden. Not at..." His voice collapsed. "She said it was protocol. She said kids shouldn't be unsupervised in the community green zone. She said..." "She lies," I said gently. "And she uses people." He swallowed hard. "I know." The clipboard queen had spent years cultivating followers, not colleagues. Mason had always been her favored one, the compliant witness, the steady signature on any form she shoved across his porch. But today cracked something inside him more violently than anything she'd ever signed. He looked away, jaw clenched, voice shaking. "I saw her pull the gun before you even walked outside. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't yell. I didn't stop her. I should have said something. I should have..." "You're saying something now," I interrupted softly. That was when his breathing changed, shallower, sharper. His hands began to tremble again, but not from fear. This time from the weight of a truth he'd held too long. "She's been doing things," he whispered. "Illegal things." Aiden's fingers curled into my sleeve. I kept my voice steady. "Tell me." Mason scanned the street to make sure Regina wasn't anywhere nearby. He shifted his posture, like a man about to step across a line he couldn't return from. "She's diverting funds," he said finally. "Large amounts. Not for maintenance, not for repair, for herself. And she's been covering it by filing fake violation fees." His face twisted with guilt. "And I helped her do it." The tyrant in heels wasn't just power hungry. She was siphoning money out of the neighborhood. "Mason," I said carefully, "did you know?" "I suspected," he whispered, eyes burning. "But I didn't want to believe it. She said the fees were standard. She said she'd explain everything once the board reorganized. She said transparency would destabilize the community. I didn't want conflict. I didn't want to be the problem. But then she pointed a gun at your kid." His voice broke entirely. "That's when I realized she's the problem, not us." A silent stretch between us, full of unraveling loyalties and overdue realizations. He wiped his face with the heel of his hand. "There's more. She installed unauthorized enforcement modules in the HOA management system. Stuff she wasn't allowed to access. Stuff she doesn't even understand. I thought they were just new compliance tools, but after what happened today, they're weapons," I finished. He nodded. "Yes." That was my opening. This was how victory strategy number 2, legal technicality and authority exposure, began to move. Because everything he just said was dynamite. I stepped closer. "Mason, will you tell the oversight committee what you told me?" He hesitated, but not like before. Not from fear of Regina. From fear of becoming visible for the first time. "Yes," he whispered. "I'll tell them everything. I'll sign statements. I'll testify. I won't let her hurt anyone again." Aiden exhaled shakily. "Thank you," he said quietly. Mason blinked hard. "He's just a kid. She crossed a line no one crosses." He looked toward the end of the street, toward where the officer of rules had disappeared, voice hardening. "You're not the only one she pushed too far. People are ready to talk. You won't be alone." That was the first time since this began that I felt the shift, not just away from Regina, but towards something bigger, something collective, something unstoppable. "Good," I said, "because what comes next, we do it together." Mason straightened his shoulders. "I'm ready." Mason's confession hadn't even finished echoing in my head when I realized we had crossed a threshold, one that Regina Harland would never be able to shove back shut. The clipboard queen had ruled this neighborhood by fear, paperwork, and the constant threat of humiliation. But the moment Mason stepped into the light, her entire facade wobbled, and now it was time to build the counterstrike. Back inside my home office, I set Aiden up with his sketchbook while I powered on the system that had been collecting silent data for months. I wasn't just a homeowner, I was a systems compliance analyst, someone who understood digital architecture and authorization, trails the same way my brother understood wind speed and distance. If Regina Harland had been tampering with internal modules, leaving unauthorized traces, I would find them. The Enforcer in Crimson Thought technology was just another weapon she could wave around like her laminated violation slips. She had no idea software had a memory, and that every unauthorized keystroke left footprints. I tightened the wrist brace on my right hand and leaned forward, pulling up the HOA portal's back end. Mason stood behind me, shifting nervously. "These," I said, highlighting the red-coded anomalies, "are entries she shouldn't be making. Access level 3. That belongs only to the treasurer and the oversight auditor." He swallowed. "I signed off on those because she said they were system updates." "They're not updates," I said. "They're diversions." The tyrant in heels had been clever enough to route the money through maintenance categories: lawn care, pest control, structural, inspections, but sloppy enough to leave mismatched digital signatures behind. And digital signatures never lied. Mason dragged a hand over his face. "I can't believe I helped her." "You didn't help her," I said. "She used you." He closed his eyes. That was the moment shame began to transform into purpose. This part of the plan wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was methodical. It was surgical. And it was exactly where the victory strategy, legal technicality, and authority exposure tightened its grip. The officer of rules didn't know it, but she had built her own downfall with every unauthorized click. I opened a second window. We need a complete log extraction. Every module she accessed, every violation she pushed through, every fee she assigned. Mason frowned. "Can't she wipe her history?" "No," I murmured. "She can delete the surface entries, but she can't erase the shadow logs. That's what the oversight committee uses during audits." He blinked. "Shadow logs?" "Exactly," I typed rapidly, pulling encrypted layers into readable form. She went rogue inside a system designed to catch rogue actors. Aiden looked up from his drawing. "Dad, does that mean she's in trouble?" I turned to him gently. "It means she crossed rules even the HOA can't protect." Mason let out a slow, shaky breath. "I'll give testimony, but we need more than just my statement." "We will," I said. "Tonight." His eyes widened. "Tonight?" "She's already rattled. The moment she realizes you're not backing her anymore, she'll try to bury evidence. The clipboard queen won't sit still while her kingdom collapses." He nodded slowly. "Okay, what do we need?" "3 things," I said, pulling out a notepad. "First, a full copy of the shadow logs. Second, verification that the diverted funds never went toward community maintenance. Third, at least one additional neighbor willing to confirm she pressured them." Mason hesitated. "The neighbors, they're scared of her." "Not all," I said. "Fear breaks when someone pushes first, and you pushed." His jaw tightened. "Not with fear now, but with resolve." "Let's do it," he said. We headed out into the evening heat, walking toward the northern row of townhomes. Houses maintained just well enough to pretend the HOA was functional, but not enough to justify the thousands Regina Harland had siphoned off. Streetlights flickered on. Aiden stayed with my neighbor, safe and far from the chaos. Our first stop was Mrs. Dwyer's porch, a gentle woman in her 60s, always polite and always silent whenever the board chair marched through the neighborhood, with her clipboard tucked like a weapon under her arm. I knocked once. Mason stood beside me, hands clenched. When she opened the door, her eyes widened. "I heard the shouting today," she whispered. "Is everything all right?" "No," I said honestly. "And that's why we're here." Her gaze shifted past me, toward the street where Regina usually patrolled. Fear flickered. "She can't know I'm talking to you." Mason stepped forward. "She won't. We just need to know if she pressured you into signing any forms." Mrs. Dwyer's lip trembled. Then she nodded, slow, decisive, like someone finally done being bullied. She threatened to fine me for my ramp, she whispered, said it violated aesthetic guidelines. She told me if I didn't sign her paperwork, she'd have it removed. That was it. The second witness, the second crack in Regina's armor. I exhaled, steady and certain. We're bringing her down, I said, and tonight is when it starts. Mrs. Dwyer's trembling confession hadn't even faded from the air before I knew the night was far from over. The clipboard queen had spent years manipulating vulnerable neighbors, cornering the elderly, and threatening families who didn't have the strength or the military-trained relatives to stand up to her. But the moment that sweet woman whispered, she threatened my ramp, the final crack in Regina Harlan's kingdom split wide open. We just had to drive something through it. Mason followed me down the steps of her porch, shoulders squared now, not hunched, not hiding. Beside him, the streetlights cast slanted shadows across the sidewalk, as if the whole neighborhood was finally watching. And maybe it was. Fear kept them silent, but fear had changed sides tonight. We need one more piece, I murmured, one undeniable, irrefutable link between the diverted funds and her personal use. The enforcer in crimson thought she was invisible, but thieves always left fingerprints, financial ones most of all. Mason frowned. What's the plan now? Digital investigation, I said. She hides behind HOA authority, but she uses personal accounts for the final transfers. I just have to trace the bridge. He swallowed. You think she'll notice? She's already nervous, I said. The moment she realizes you've turned, she'll panic, and panic makes tyrants sloppy. We headed toward the community pavilion, our next location, a small open-air structure where residents gathered for potlucks and board announcements. A place Regina loved to stand in, heels clicking against the wooden planks as she announced new finds with that smug tilt of her chin. Even her shadow had seemed to demand obedience. Tonight, we used it as a rally point. Why here? Mason whispered. Because she installed the new Wi-Fi system herself, I answered. And I want to see exactly what she patched into it. He blinked. Regina did that? Personally? Yes, I said. She wanted direct remote access, but what she didn't realize is that any hardware update includes metadata she cannot erase. The officer of rules was brilliant in her cruelty and paperwork dominance, but she was a novice in digital warfare. I opened my tablet and connected to the pavilion's network. Sure enough, a hidden admin channel popped up, one not listed anywhere in the community documentation. There, I whispered. That's her. Mason leaned in. What am I looking at? A shadow network, I said. She created it to route violation alerts directly to her phone before they hit the official system. She's been filtering which complaints get buried. He stared. Why bother? To keep certain homeowners unpunished, I said. The ones who benefit her. The ones who gave her favors. The ones who paid her off. The tyrant in heels wasn't just abusing authority. She was selling immunity, and every hidden module on this pavilion's network was proof. Mason whispered, "This is enough to bury her." "It's enough to start the fire," I corrected. "But we still need evidence that money moved from the HOA account to her personal spending." He hesitated. "How do we get that?" By finding the transactions she forgot to hide. I tapped a series of commands, my fingers moving on muscle memory, years of compliance work, digital auditing, and forensic training guiding them. These logs show what device is connected to the hidden channel. Mason's eyes widened when he saw the points appear on the map, small blue dots marking her movements. When she made transfers, I said, she did them from the same phone that connected to this network. But she could say anyone used her phone. Not if the timestamps match her board meetings, her violation patrols, and her private inspections of certain properties, I said. She built a pattern, and a pattern is unbreakable evidence. A rustle sounded behind us. Both of us turned sharply. For a split second, adrenaline spiked, until a familiar figure stepped into the dim pavilion light. Elliot, my brother, still wearing half his gear from training, still moving like every noise mattered. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes scanned our faces, then the tablet, then the darkness where Regina Harlan's domain loomed. "You two ready for this?" he finally said, voice low. Mason nodded weakly. I nodded firmly. "Good," Elliot murmured. "Because she isn't." He stepped closer. She's watching the neighborhood right now, he said quietly. She's nervous. Her blinds are moving. She knows something slipped today. My pulse kicked. The clipboard queen was stirring, and when Tyrants sensed collapse, they didn't retreat. They lashed out. All right, I said, locking the final data package. Tomorrow is the confrontation. Tonight is preparation. Elliot gave a single sharp nod. Then let's finish this. Elliot's quiet warning echoed in my head as we walked toward the community center, the designated location for tomorrow's emergency HOA session, an event the board chair believed she controlled down to the last breath. But tonight, under the parking lot lights that flickered like nervous eyelids, the place felt different, like the entire building was holding its breath for what was coming. Mason walked beside me, more determined than shaken now. His shoulders were squared, his steps had purpose. The shift in him was subtle but powerful, fear turning into resolve, and he'd need every ounce of that air in his lungs for what we were about to trigger. We're really doing this? He asked quietly. Yes, I said. We're setting the stage before she wakes up tomorrow. Regina Harland will think she's walking into another routine meeting. She won't see the trap until it's already snapped shut. The enforcer in crimson had spent years tightening her grip on this neighborhood, weaving manipulations and threats until even the strongest families bowed out of exhaustion. But her blind spot was always the same. She underestimated the quiet ones, the ones she thought she had already broken. And this time, she underestimated a sniper's brother. We reached the steps of the center. Inside, tables sat arranged for committees, the same ones she used like weapons. The clipboard queen loved nothing more than a stack of violation forms and a microphone that boosted her voice to godlike volume. She treated each meeting like her own coronation. Tonight, that microphone would betray her. Elliot joined us at the door. He moved with sharp precision, scanning each corner, assessing angles, like he couldn't switch off that part of his training, even here. You're sure she won't show? He asked. She never attends setup nights, I said. That's what the officer of rules uses her volunteers for, so she can walk in last minute and look superior. Elliot smirked. Arrogance is always handy. We stepped inside. The quiet hum of the empty room felt eerie, but strategic. Perfect. I placed my bag on the main table and pulled out the tablet loaded with proof, network logs, unauthorized account patterns, diverted funds, and hidden privileges linked directly to the tyrant in heels. This room is our battleground, I said. We'll preload the evidence into the projector system. When she tries to push her agenda tomorrow, we'll slip in the reveal. She won't be able to stop it. Mason hesitated. What if she tries to shut it down? Elliot tapped a metal panel where the center's main power controls were locked. She can't reach these without a key card, and guess who forgot hers last week? He held up a slim card with Regina's name printed boldly across it. My breath caught. Where'd you... She dropped it when she was screaming at that landscaper, he said. Didn't notice, never came back for it. Of course she didn't. The tyrant in heels never believed she could lose anything. I connected the card, activated admin access, and watched the projector sync with our data. Package. It was beautiful, silent, deadly. Mason exhaled. She's done. Almost, I said. We still need tomorrow's final trigger. What is that? He asked. The neighbors she ignored, I answered. Those she bullied, those she thought would stay afraid. I looked up at him. Tonight, we gather them. Elliot nodded. Community canvassing, victory strategy step 2. We left the center and moved through the neighborhood. Soft porches, dim windows, familiar silence. But when residents opened their doors and saw who stood outside and heard what we uncovered, something changed. One by one, expressions hardened, spines straightened. Voices, shaky at first, shifted into anger and clarity. Mrs. Dwyer whispered, You really have proof? Yes, Mr. Rourke said. She stole from us? Every month. Parents, retirees, veterans, young couples, every type of homeowner Regina Harland had insulted, fined, or threatened, began stepping out with us into the night. A quiet uprising. Elliot watched each person join, his jaw tightening. She has no idea what's coming. No tyrant ever does, I said. By the time we returned to the community center, we had a crowd, a silent, focused crowd, strength in numbers, truth in hand. and fury building like a storm waiting to strike. Tomorrow, Regina walked into her throne room. Tomorrow, we'd burn the throne. By the time the morning sun cut across Briarwood Ridge, our quiet uprising had turned into a force with a pulse. People poured toward the community center in a steady stream. No shouting, no signs, just a collective tension so tightly wound it felt like static over the pavement. It was the kind of silence that made tyrants tremble long before they ever saw what caused it. Inside, chairs filled fast. Neighbors sat straighter than usual, eyes sharp, not drifting toward phones or small talk. They were waiting, ready, and they weren't alone. Elliot leaned against the back wall, arms folded, scanning the room with the focus of a man who'd pulled teammates out of fire zones. Mason sat beside me at the front table, his fingers interlaced with his own resolve. This was his moment as much as mine. Then the doors swung open. Regina Harlan strode in first, the board chair in her signature crimson blazer, clipboard clutched like a badge of authority. The enforcer in crimson expected applause. Instead, she walked into a wall of stairs so cold it made her heels hesitate. Her eyes swept the room, puzzled at the turnout. Well, seems we have high engagement today? Not a single neighbor smiled back. She approached the podium like the tyrant in heels she was, chin lifted, behavior rehearsed. Let's begin. I have several urgent violations to address, starting with unauthorized gatherings on community property. The gathering was authorized, I said, rising from my seat. By your own bylaws. Her head snapped toward me. Excuse me? Sit. Down. You're out of order. Behind me, Mrs. Dwyer murmured. Not today. Others nodded. Regina's grip on her clipboard tightened. If you people think intimidation will... A bright tone chirped from the projector system. The lights dimmed. She jerked around. Who touched the controls? I stepped closer. Your keycard did. Elliot at the back raised the card just enough for her to see, and her face drained. The officer of rules had no idea she'd dropped it days ago, and even less idea we'd accessed everything she'd been hiding. Before she could snatch the microphone, the first slide hit the wall behind her. Unauthorized financial transfers. Her name. The accounts. The timestamps. Gasps rippled through the room like shockwaves breaking off a cliff. That's fake, she snapped, voice cracking. This data is manipulated. Slide 2. Network logs showing she rerouted HOA funds into personal service subscriptions. Slide 3. Privileged access settings she gave herself illegally. Slide 4. A recorded voicemail where she threatened the landscaper to hide an overcharge scheme. Her control shattered. Turn it off, she screamed. Shut it down. No, Mr. Rourke said loudly, standing. You shut us down for months. The clipboard queen's eyes darted, seeking a lifeline, but everyone she'd humiliated was now staring at her without fear. That's enough, she barked. Security! Someone get security! There is no security, Regina, Elliot replied, stepping forward. Just residents you pushed too far. Her voice fractured. This is an ambush. Illegal. This meeting is adjourned. No, I said. This meeting is the first honest one we've had under your leadership. I walked to the podium, not touching her, just taking the space she once dominated. She backed away like the platform itself had betrayed her. Neighbors filled the aisle, forming a loose semicircle. Not threatening, just united. Power had shifted, permanently. Let's continue, I said, projecting my voice. Today, we vote to remove Regina Harlan from the board for financial misconduct, abuse of authority, community endangerment, and violation of bylaws. Murmurs surged into agreement. Hands went up. Dozens, then almost everyone. The enforcer in crimson spun, panicked. This is a coup. You can't vote without the treasurer present. Mrs. Patton lifted her hand. I'm right here, and I vote yes. Regina's mouth fell open. Mason leaned in and whispered, She's crumbling. The tyrant in heels tried one last defense. You don't understand the responsibility of this position. We do, a father in the back said. That's why you're done. The vote finalized. Overwhelming. Irrefutable. Regina's clipboard slipped from her shaking fingers and hit the floor with a crack that sounded like the end of a rain. She looked at me, eyes wide, not angry anymore, but hollow, like she finally saw herself reflected in everyone she'd tried to control. You're finished, I said quietly, and the neighborhood will heal because of it. The crowd erupted, not in noise, but relief. Pure, collective relief. For the first time in years, Briarwood Ridge breathed. Regina Harlan didn't move at first. She just stood there in the center of the community room, surrounded by the neighbors she'd once ruled through fear. Her crimson blazer, the one she wore like armor, looked smaller now, almost swallowed by the reality she could no longer outrun. The clipboard queen had been dethroned in front of everyone, and there was no script left for her to cling to. She finally bent down, fingers trembling as she snatched up her fallen clipboard, but the sound of it scraping across the tile only amplified how far she'd fallen. The tyrant in heels wasn't towering anymore. She was shrinking with every breath she took. "I'll appeal this," she whispered, voice splintered. I'll sue all of you." "No, you won't," Mrs. Patton said gently, stepping forward. "Not because you can't, but because you know discovery will expose even more." Regina's eyes twitched, knowing it was true. The officer of rules had never expected the rules to turn on her. As she backed toward the exit, Elliot moved aside, not blocking her, not intimidating her, just letting her pass. She hesitated when she reached him, looking at the sniper with a mixture of fear and disbelief. He wasn't aiming anything at her now, but his stillness alone told her she was outmatched. She slipped by, heels clacking unevenly, and left without another word. The doors thudded shut, and the room exhaled all at once. Mason let out a shaky laugh, dropping into the chair beside me. "I can't believe it's over." "It's over because you didn't back down," I told him. "None of us did." Neighbors gathered around, offering pats on the shoulder, relieved smiles, grateful nods. But beneath all that relief was something else. Hope. Real hope. Briarwood Ridge finally felt like a neighborhood again, not a battleground ruled by a self-appointed enforcer in crimson. Still, not everything was healed yet. I stepped outside for air. The autumn breeze rolled through the cul-de-sac, brushing over the cracked sidewalk chalk. Where my boy had been drawing in the morning, Regina pulled a gun on him. That chalk, blue and yellow streaks, had become a symbol in my own mind, a reminder of why I fought, why I stood in that room, why I didn't let myself be intimidated or bullied or silenced. Mason joined me, hands in his pockets. "Do you think she'll really leave us alone?" "She has no authority left," I said. "She'll bluster." But the board voted. The bylaws are clear. "And the cops?" he asked. "We gave them everything," I said. "Financial logs, witness statements, the footage from my porch cam. They'll handle the rest." He nodded, breathing steadier now. But then his voice softened. "Dad." I didn't realize how scared I was until after. I put a hand on his shoulder. Bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about choosing to stand anyway. He swallowed hard and nodded again. Behind us, Elliot walked out of the community center, giving the neighborhood one final sweep with his eyes before relaxing his posture. "You did good today," he said. "We all did," I replied. "No," he said, shaking his head. "You kept your cool when most men would have broken something, or someone. That matters." Hearing that from him, a man who'd lived through the worst the world could throw at him, hit deeper than he probably knew. But the moment of quiet reflection didn't last long. A few neighbors drifted outside, gathering in small groups, talking about next steps, new elections, future improvements. Briarwood Ridge wasn't just healing, it was rebuilding. "You think they'll remember this day?" Mason asked. "They'll remember the day the community took its power back," I said, "and the day they stopped letting fear run the neighborhood." I looked directly into the imaginary lens of every viewer who'd ever been bullied by an HOA, shoved around by someone in a blazer who thought authority meant cruelty. "And if you've ever stood up to someone who thought they owned your voice," I added quietly, "you know exactly why this fight mattered." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the pavement, the same pavement where Regina Harlan once strutted, like she ruled everything she could see. Now it belonged to the people again. "This is where things change," I said. "Not just for us, but for every family who refuses to let power-hungry leaders control their lives." Then, with the calm that comes only after a storm finally breaks, I closed. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.